Hey guys, it's RX Science here, and today I'll teach you about covalent bonds. So let's go to the next slide. So this is my whole intro and things you need to understand about covalent bonds. So basically, first I recommend you to watch my video about ionic bonds because I explain the basics of valence electrons, the periodic table, and stuff like that. I will explain what valence electrons are since they're very important to covalent bonds. So let's continue. Here's some more notes, which is basically what valence electrons are. So basically, valence electrons are electrons that are on the very outer shell. Depending on the atomic number of the element, let's say the atomic number is 20 or above, the shells will hold different amount. Usually it is the first shell holds 2, then the rest holds 8. But it only depends on your atomic number or the element's atomic number. So yeah, and all elements want a full outer shell. They don't want extra electrons in their outer shell. So those are what valence electrons are called, as you can read in my slideshow that I made here. And then here's a brief picture that shows you the valence electrons. It's pointing to 1, but it's actually every one of them in the outer shell. And yeah. Then I'll teach you about the octet rule. So the octet rule refers to the tendency of atoms to prefer to have 8 electrons in the valence shell. The valence shell is also called the outer shell. When atoms have fewer than 8 electrons, they tend to react and form more stable compounds. An exception to an octet of electrons is in the case of the first noble gas, helium, which only has 2 valence electrons. What are covalent bonds? What is the thing that we're all waiting for me to say? So, as you know, ionic bonds are bonds where electrons basically get taken and then they gift them. It's basically kind of like stealing, but I don't want to put it that way. It's kind of like that though. And then where covalent bonds are basically kinder and more nice version of ionic bonds. And what I mean by that is that instead of taking electrons, they actually share them together. I'll show you a picture soon. As you can see here, there's a picture on the bottom right. So, covalent bonds occur between nonmetals. Let's take an example. Let's take H2O. H2O is a covalent bond, which is water. Instead of taking electrons, they share it together. As you can see in this picture here, they're sharing it. It kind of looks like a Venn diagram, which is like the dots in the middle of the similarity section, which if it was a Venn diagram, if it's in the similarity section, that means they're sharing it. As you can see here, oxygen and hydrogen are sharing one right here and then another one right here. So both of them are happy. This is a Lewis dot structure for a covalent bond, by the way. So an oxygen atom only has 6 valence electrons. And then so it would want 2 more for a full shell. Hydrogen only has 1 valence electron, so it would only want 1 more, because the first shell holds 2 electrons. When H2O forms oxygen, they share 2 electrons, and hydrogen shares their own electrons. As you can see, this is the only electron of hydrogen, and it's sharing it. And then usually the electrons of the oxygen would also come around and hang around, basically. Also, another important thing that you should learn is basically where the electrons want to stay around. Let's say you have H2O. Since oxygen is more electronegative, the electrons would want to hang around with oxygen, of course. Because hydrogen is less electronegative, the electrons would spend less time near hydrogen. And now I'll tell you some examples of covalent bonds. Now I will tell you 3 or more examples of covalent bonds. One of them is ammonia, then hydrogen or H2, and then water. And yeah. Also remember, some bonds or some compounds such as salt is actually not a covalent bond. It's actually an ionic bond. So be careful with all the bonds. Let's say like some other compound is not actually a covalent bond and something else. So you should also be careful with that. Now that we've finished the slideshow, I'll also tell you a full summary of what I've gone over. Once again, I'll explain to you what valence electrons are. Valence electrons are electrons on the very outer shell. And the octet rule is basically, a short version is the tendency of atoms to have a full outer shell. And then covalent bonds are basically the nicer version of ionic bonds. And they like to share and not like take and steal and stuff like that. I guess that's how you would put it. And then also a fun fact is covalent bonds are the strongest bond. And here's a quick picture of a covalent bond on the screen. As you can see here, this is H2O because there's 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, as you can see. It also says here H2O. And yeah, that's basically it for covalent bonds. Hopefully you enjoyed. Tell me what else I should add and what other videos I should make about in science. And bye.